Hello, and welcome to Alex Rogue and the Crystal Pendant, a book written by Ryan Russon and narrated by me, Jordan Levine. This week, we will listen to Chapter 2 of the serial novel. Without further ado, Chapter 2. Chapter 2, The Cat and the Snakes. 2 years later. The bell rang. Kids scrambled out the door, and, within a few seconds, I was the only one left. Summer vacation had just started, and even the teacher was getting up to leave. "Aren't you leaving, Alex?" he asked me hurriedly. "Yeah," I answered, walking out of the classroom. After I left, he flicked the lights off, locked the door, and scurried over to his car. My 5th grade teacher had always been fond of breaks, and it was obvious to the class that he hated teaching, always grumbling here and there when we were in the middle of a lesson. Crossing the blacktop, I went my usual route through the school until I reached the sidewalk. From there, I walked down the empty street in the direction of my home. My teacher's car sped down the road, blowing past me. It was funny how much everyone was in a rush to get home when summer vacation had just started. My house came into view as I came around the street's curve. The little 2-story house had been my home for 7 years. Before that, I was told we lived in New York City. Punching in the code on the keypad outside the garage, it started to rumble open, revealing my garage. I walked in and, after crossing the room, closed the large mechanical door. Then I stepped inside my house. "How was your last day?" my mom asked from the kitchen. She had heard the garage door close clumsily. "Fine. We had a party." I made little quotations with my fingers. My mom smiled as I continued. "Mr. Bloom didn't really care about it, and all we did was just sit and talk," I told her. Taking off my backpack, I set it down beside the kitchen table and sat down at one of the chairs. "Are we doing anything this summer?" I asked my mom. "There are no big plans. That being said, you could have some friends over if you want to," she replied, just as her phone buzzed. She picked it up and looked at the text. After a few seconds, she let out a little laugh and started to text back. "When's Dad going to get home?" "He'll be late, Alex. His busy tax season started today," she responded, looking up from her phone. My dad was an accountant, and he owned part of a small company. I also had a brother in 4th grade, but he went to a private school. Having a younger brother meant that I had to share a room with him. At the moment, he was into Legos and had boxes of sets all around the room that he got for both his birthday last month and Christmas. He normally relied on me to help him build them, and some took time because of their size. Yesterday, I had spent an entire hour just building one while he played with a different set. Of course, by now it was already broken, having fallen off the dresser in our room this morning. He would probably have me rebuild it later. A small desk was located to the back of our room where I was supposed to do homework. But I actually just drew pictures and comics because my teacher didn't really assign homework. My phone rested on the edge of it. Picking up the device, I sat down on my beanbag chair beside the desk and powered it on. School had ended only 10 minutes ago, and already I had a bunch of texts from people saying that they were already on the way to the airport to fly somewhere for a luxurious vacation or heading out on a big road trip for the summer. I asked a few if they could hang out in the coming weeks, before I heard my mom call me from downstairs. "Alex, why don't you come practice?" Sighing, I set my phone back down and went downstairs. Every day for 20 minutes, I had to practice my saxophone. I came into our front room and knelt down beside my case to open it, undoing the tight latches and pulling parts of the instrument out. Assembling it, I pulled out my music, sat down, and began to play. I was in the jazz band at school, or what you could call a jazz band. We would play short songs where each part would play at most 5 notes, proving that the music teacher didn't really care either. It took us about a minute to learn them each, and this year we had only done 5. Now that I think about it, None of the staff at my school cared about teaching. A few minutes of my practice had gone by after I played the easy songs a few times, and I started to mess around on some notes. "Play what your teacher wrote down in your notebook," my mom said from the kitchen. "I know, Mom." I took jazz lessons for the tenor saxophone every Tuesday after school. On those days, I didn't have to practice at home. Today, however, was Wednesday, so I did. I felt around for my backpack beside the chair to grab the notebook, and saw something move out of the corner of my eye. It was a pencil. It had rolled a little when I waved my hand in that direction. That was strange, I thought. I shook my hand in the same direction again, but nothing happened. After trying a few more times, I realized it had probably been a draft or something. I sat back down to resume my practice. After fingering through some of my other songs a few times, getting some yells from my mom telling me to play, and responding back to her that I was fingering, I was in the middle of a song when I heard the garage open. "Dad," I murmured, carefully putting down my saxophone. I ran to the garage. The door swung open just as I strolled into the room. "Alex, hey buddy," he said cheerfully. "Where's your mother?" "In the kitchen," I told him. The second I sat back down, my 20-minute timer went off, and I packed up my saxophone, only to retreat back up to my room right after. Recoiling back onto the beanbag chair, I grabbed my phone to see if any of my friends had responded. No one had yet, and once I saw that, I picked up the book I was reading and opened it to where my bookmark was placed. Pulling out the bookmark, I started to read. The book was called The Hobbit, and in my opinion, it was one of the best books ever written. Of course, that's just my opinion. Once I had been reading for an hour, mesmerized by the keen way the author molded their words together, I turned the last few pages and closed the book with a satisfying clunk. Then I got up and walked downstairs, only to find my dad talking with my mom, though they didn't notice I was there at first. "How did you get back so early?" Mom asked. "Turns out my busy season doesn't actually start until next week. Our scheduling department can't do their job, apparently. They got the weeks mixed up," he replied, throwing his hands up in the air in subdued frustration, as if he'd already gone through this with his coworkers. "Well, that's good. School just got out for Alex," she said. "5th grade," he murmured. "Isn't this the year?" he asked in a suddenly quiet voice, turning to make sure I wasn't eavesdropping. I ducked out of sight at the last second. "We'll find out. We should get notified in a few days, if so," she told him. What were they talking about? Junior high? That must have been it. I slowly crept back upstairs so they wouldn't know I had been eavesdropping, and then ran down a moment later. They stopped talking just as I reached the final step. We exchanged glances, but without saying a word, I passed through the kitchen and opened the door to our backyard. Whatever they were talking about, they didn't want me to know. Shutting the back door, I looked around my backyard and saw a basketball lying in the grass. I had played on a team in a rec league a few years ago, but hadn't played any organized sports since then. I picked up the ball and made a shot at the hoop. It completely missed. Instead, sailed past the backboard and over the neighbor's fence. This basically proved how good of a shot I was, even when I played in the rec league. I hadn't scored a single basket for our team, and my only contribution came from a few measly free throws. Shoot! I sucked in my breath, glancing through the window into my house. My mom and dad had gone into my dad's office, where they continued to talk about whatever secret they were keeping from me. I waited a few moments to make sure they wouldn't come out, and then climbed up onto the fence using a little stack of bricks beside it. Surveying the yard, I saw the basketball lying near the back, resting on a heap of grass. I scooted over to a spot where I could get down, but still climb back up, and then jumped down. My feet thudded onto the dirt, and I approached the lawn. All of a sudden, I stepped onto something squishy. It was a baby snake. I sprang back with the agility of a frightened cat, but then realized after a moment that it was dead. It was, however, a strange color, black with purple stripes. Was there a type of snake that had purple stripes? I didn't recall ever seeing one in person or on a picture before. Still shaken, I slowly ran over to the yard, grabbed my basketball, and returned to the fence. For one last time, I turned to look back at the snake, thinking something could have changed. Still there, just how I left it. Suddenly, I felt a searing pain just above my left foot. Instinctively, I looked down and saw another snake slithering away. I followed it, and the moment the creature thought it was safe, I slammed my shoe into its skull, killing it instantly. After making sure the snake really was dead, I looked down at where I had felt the pain, expecting to see a gash where it had bit me. Nothing was there. I looked around my leg, but still found nothing. Had it not bit me? Had I just been imagining it? I checked the area once more, but still found no mark. The other dead snake was there as well as the one I had just crushed. I turned my head and saw another, and another. It was a yard full of these strangely colored snakes. Suddenly, I realized one thing. They weren't all dead. At least 3 were coming straight for me. I nearly leapt over the fence and then fell, landing on my hands and knees, back in my own yard. I turned back once I knew I was safe, and heard some scampering sounds from the other side. What could they be? I peeped my head just barely over the wall, high enough so that I could see what was going on. The 3 snakes that had been chasing me were all lying down, dead, in the dirt. Confused, I looked around the rest of the yard, but there was nothing else in sight. Slowly, I tossed the basketball to the ground and walked back inside. Just as I shut the door, my mom stepped out of the office. She glanced at me, but didn't say anything as she walked into the kitchen. I went back upstairs and headed back to my room. With nothing else to do, I pulled out the broken Lego helicopter and the instructions to build it, and started to repair it. I finished fixing it the second I heard the garage door open. My brother came running up the stairs a moment later. My dad had gone to pick him up. He opened the door and then walked in. "Hey, Alex." "Hey, Sam," I answered. "Summer break, finally. Oh, you fixed the Lego set. Thanks," he said, glancing at the helicopter in my hands. I handed it to him, and he put it back on the shelf. He picked up his own phone and sat down on the beanbag chair as I stood up. "You're not even going to play with it?" I laughed, looking down at him. He glanced up at me. "It's summer vacation. I've got time." Just as I sat down on the couch downstairs, the doorbell rang. My mom went to answer it, and I was surprised when I heard my friend's voice. "Can Alex hang out?" It seemed like I was always being dragged off to do things. Some good and some bad. "Sure. Alex, Ben's here." I had been friends with Ben for all of elementary school, starting from kindergarten up until now. He lived down the street, so we hung out a lot. Plus, our parents went to school together a long time ago, which made us even more likely to be friends. "Coming," I called, hurrying to the front door. Ben waved as I stepped outside. "Hey, glad school's out?" he asked, just as my front door shut behind us. "Who wouldn't be?" I answered, opening the gate to my backyard. A moment later, I returned, wheeling out my bike. He climbed onto his and rode down our driveway. I climbed onto mine and followed him. "Yeah, I guess you're right." We rode down the street and stopped in front of his house once we reached it. Currently, it was only him and his older brother James there now. His sister was in her sophomore year of college. Or had just finished, I guess. Ben told me she would fly home tomorrow. We parked our bikes on the porch and walked in. Passing through the living room, I spotted James playing a game on their Xbox. We went outside, and Ben threw me a lacrosse stick. "Come on, let's play," he said as I caught it. He had taught me how to play when I had come over in the past. "When did you get those?" I asked him, pointing to the 2 goals on either side of the yard. They were new. "Oh, a few weeks ago for my birthday. By the way, are you coming to the party tomorrow? Each of the weekends since my birthday have been so busy, so we had to wait until now to plan it. And besides, what better way to start off your summer than with a party?" he replied, taking position in front of a goal. "I wouldn't miss it. More than that, I got you something I think you'll like," I told him as I stood at the other goal. I bought him a pack of lacrosse balls. Loading the ball into the net, I threw it at the goal he was guarding, but he easily caught it and threw it back. I failed to catch it, and the ball sailed into my goal. "I see you haven't been practicing," he laughed as I picked up the ball. "I sure haven't been," I murmured, starting to throw it back at him. Just as I thrust the stick forward, I saw a black figure out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head towards it and saw a little black cat, but something wasn't quite right about it. It looked almost see-through. "What was that?" Ben choked, laughing. The ball had landed at least 5 feet to the right of the goal. He picked it back up with his stick and threw it. I had since looked back at him and somehow managed to catch it. Just as James came outside, he grabbed a stick and volunteered to be on my team. "No, that's not fair. You're way better than me," Ben complained, hurling the ball he had scooped out of his goal back at us. James caught it with a simple flick of his wrist. Then the ball shot back out of his stick and flew into Ben's goal, all in a second. It was almost as if it didn't happen at all. "It's 1-2 now. We're winning," James smirked at his brother. He glanced at me. "Let's do this." Our game continued and eventually came to an end. The final score was 13-5, with James and I winning. James had scored 11. I had scored 2. "We win," James laughed, tossing his stick back into the bucket he had grabbed it from. He high-fived me and then ran inside, powering on the Xbox a few minutes later. "Well, that was fair," Ben admitted, putting away his stick and the ball. I set mine down and followed him inside, grinning the whole time. "Can you take out the trash?" my dad asked me later that night. "Sure," I answered, closing out of the game I was playing on my computer. I stood up from my chair and walked over to the trash can, taking the bag out of it. Just before I opened the door, the motion sensor light went off from outside. I peered into our dark yard and saw one of the black and purple snakes slithering in the grass towards the door. Behind it was the same cat I had seen over at Ben's house, the strange, translucent one. It crept closer and then suddenly slashed at the snake with its claws, killing it instantly. So that was what was killing the snakes, this unusual cat. It glanced up suddenly, and we exchanged looks for a second. Then, it bolted out of sight. Quickly, I ran outside and threw the trash into the big bin. Then, I ran back inside. Closing the door behind me, I wondered about the snakes, the cat, and everything that had happened. When I was asleep that night, I had a dream. In it, I was surrounded by black and purple snakes on some strange stone platform. It was a foggy night, and trees blocked most of the sky from view. The snakes were all slithering closer. They closed in. Then, all of a sudden, the same cat stepped forward into the moonlight. It approached the snakes slowly, growling at them. The snakes backed away, but then quickly slithered forward. They tried to bite at the cat, but found it was too quick for them. It dodged to the side, but then faced the snakes again. The snakes slowly crept forward again, but all at once the cat lunged forward and lashed out at all of them. In its one attack, the cat had already dealt with most of the snakes. The rest started to retreat, but more snakes suddenly surged forward from out of the fog. They surrounded the cat. Just as they prepared to strike, the cat disappeared. Confused, the snakes looked around, moving their heads, but found no trace of their target. The fog oozily covered the floor, making most of the snakes vanish from my view. I stepped back, just as they whipped out from their hiding place, and attacked. That's it for Chapter 2. Next week, we will offer Chapter 3, continuing Alex Rogue and his discovery of the crystal pendant. We have been overwhelmed by the number of you who have downloaded and listened to Chapter 1 and hope you continue to enjoy. If you have any feedback or want to connect with us, please email us at alexroguebook@gmail.com or on any of your favorite social media feeds, #AlexRogueBook, and we'd be happy to interact with you. Thanks for listening.